Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Steve Powell, a retired techie living in Portland, Oregon. This is episode 2, and today is September 7th. Thanks for joining me again as we dive into another week of thoughts, stories, and hopefully some conversation starters. Each week, I'll try to bring you a mix of topics that have been on my mind, from politics and technology to business, health, and life here in the Pacific Northwest. I'll share my views, and I'd love to hear yours, whether in the Substack chat, via DM, or just in your own circles. Let's kick things off with politics, and yes, we're going there, the Epstein files.
Another random commented on my Instagram that you're on the Epstein list.
The Epstein list? Are we still talking about that?
Well, are you on the list or not? It's weird that whenever it comes up, you just tell everyone to relax.
I'm not telling everyone to relax. Relax, guys.
Now, I've always leaned toward Nancy Pelosi's stance that we should focus on issues that affect broad swaths of people. But when something like Epstein resurfaces, it's hard to ignore. Trump's calling it a hoax, but last Friday, Congressman Thomas Massie ran a Twitter poll asking whether people believe Epstein was involved in underage sex trafficking and whether there's unreleased evidence implicating powerful people. 93.7% said it's not a hoax. And that's a pretty loud message. Democrats argue that Trump is trying to distract us, attacking Adam Schiff, releasing MLK Jr. files, and revisiting old scandals. There's even a term floating around, Epstein derangement syndrome. The Atlantic ran a piece on it suggesting that some folks are calling everything a distraction from Epstein. But here's the thing. Going after Epstein might weaken Trump with his base, and is why it's worth pursuing. Still, we can't lose sight of the bigger picture. We've got wealth transferring from the bottom to the top, corruption in plain sight like Trump's meme coins, attacks on institutions like the press, academia, and our law firms. Immigrant rights are being eroded, and that's affecting minority populations across the board. We've seen the rise of paramilitary forces, ICE, the National Guard, even the release of the January 6th rioters. And both liberal and conservative military leaders are raising alarms. Foreign policy has taken an isolationist turn. Tariffs, Iraq, and even renaming the Department of War. Gerrymandering and voting rights suppression are silencing voices. We're limiting sources of truth like the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the CDC. Cybersecurity professionals are being targeted, and the Justice Department is being used to go after political opponents. And that's not a good precedent. So yes, let's start with Epstein. But let's move toward the issues that are American, not just the favorite issues of Democrats or Republicans. Switching gears to technology, let's talk about AI music. You actually heard some AI music in my podcast theme song. The theme song was created using producer.ai. I'm on the free plan, so I'm giving them credit here. I gave it a prompt, and it basically went like, create a podcast theme music in the style, of my favorite podcast, in the style of my favorite 80s band. To avoid copyright issues, producer AI rewrote it to something like modern electronic sounds, smooth pulsing synthesizers, melodic riffs, minimal percussion, understated drums, intelligent and polished new wave inspiration, instrumental, 45 seconds. And then seconds later, I had a theme. I don't own the output, but I can use it for personal stuff like this podcast. If I paid for a plan, I could use it commercially. This was my first foray into AI music, and I'm blown away by how viral some of these tracks are. In fact, one of these AI tracks actually went nuts on TikTok. It was an AI-generated instrumental with AI vocals and some very, very raunchy lyrics. I won't play the lyrics here, but if you're curious, it's on YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify. Overall, we're just entering a new world. For now, I'm keeping AI music limited to my podcast theme song. Now let's talk money. I wrote earlier in my blog that Marcia and I invested in a private equity firm that operated ATM cash machines. It sounded like a solid business. It was giving us 28% cash on cash returns over a 7-year fund life. And my first exposure to this kind of business, this ATM cash machine business, was actually back in 2004 when I ran a photo kiosk business. My photo kiosks basically took photo memory cards and could cut prints or CDs. I put these machines in a high-end grocery store. I put one in a tourist shop, and there were ATMs there. In the tourist shop, the ATM was owned by the owner's wife. In the grocery store, it was actually run by an operator. And so I thought that this would be a really good business for a private equity fund. It turns out they just ran a Ponzi scheme. And so the SEC just announced the criminal indictments that were affecting over 2,700 investors with $770 million worth of investments. And it's a shame. I think the ATM business could have been a good one, and it's a shame that it was actually run by a criminal. And then investors got hurt. Now let's shift to talk about business strategy. In the news was kind of the unmerger of Kraft and Heinz into two different businesses. The whole thing made news as it really appeared that the move was sort of an unbundle of a former merger to make one or both of the assets easier to sell. It's funny that I'm reminded that Jim Barksdale, the former CEO of Netscape, once said that there are only two ways to make money in business. One is to bundle, the other is to unbundle. My favorite unbundling example is what the airlines have done with their fees. I find that rather than paying one price, they pay separate fees for baggage, for food, for early boarding. And what this allows them to do is, I think, extract the money from folks who are willing to pay, and it allows them to also attract the most cost-sensitive customers. Similarly, I've seen with bundling with Microsoft Office, it was a great way for them to encourage adoption of even some of their less popular tools. And this reminded me of some of my own business examples when I was at Barracuda Networks. We had a whole suite of security products and an email filter, a web filter, a remote access product, a web application firewall, and every new go-to-market business leader that would come on board always used to think that bundling was the answer for us to gain more revenue. And in the end, it didn't really work for a lot of reasons. One, it didn't work because our mid-market customer base often didn't have the bandwidth to handle multiple projects at the same time. Another was associated with just the success of trials, that it turns out having lots of different projects running at a time created a risk that if any one of the evaluations failed, it would fail the whole deal. And then the third thing is that a lot of our deals were just never really greenfield. People already had some infrastructure, and it always wasn't the right time to replace every piece of technology. And so what it ended up with was that it just often wasn't the right enticement to get the customer to buy everything at once. And so that was an example where bundling might have been good in theory, but it just wasn't good in practice. So now let's get personal for a moment. I actually came across a really cool article this week on my Apple News feed. It was from National Geographic about a disease that a lot of folks don't know they have. And it happens to be one that I have. It's chronic kidney disease. I'm personally at stage 4 of chronic kidney disease. And what the article really pointed out was that a lot of people are running around not knowing they have it. And I can see why. It's pretty easy to run around reasonably asymptomatic. As an example, my EGFR, my numbers show that I'm at a 21 right now. So I'm right at the cusp of being eligible to be in the system for a kidney transplant. Yet most people who actually know me would probably not believe that I present that way. And so I would encourage any of you who have loved ones who might be at risk for kidney disease to go get tested. It's an easy thing to go do. let's talk a little bit on the lighter side about a tourist attraction in Seattle, and that is the Seattle Great Wheel. It went up in 2012. It turns out Marcia and I had never been on it, even though we're Seattle natives. We were actually recently in Seattle for a friend's launch event for her jewelry business, and we stayed at the W Hotel. So for the $28 destination fee, it actually included 2 admissions worth $23 each. So we decided to take advantage of that to take the Great Wheel. It was kind of cool. We got on the way up, you would get really good views of the city. And if you flipped around on the way down, you'd get really nice views of Puget Sound. And it was super nice. We got to go around maybe 4 or 5 times. And so it was a reasonably long ride, maybe a little anticlimactic. I don't think I would have spent the money to do it had it not actually been included with that destination fee. For those visiting Seattle, I would definitely recommend going to the Space Needle or Chihuly Gardens ahead of that, but it was kind of a nice experience to have. And finally, what I'd like to do is close with a bit of a personal reflection. And that personal reflection is about what I want to do with these podcasts. First, I'd like to thank everybody who's been giving me feedback so far in this first week. Probably the number one question that I actually got was whether or not I was going to be inviting guests onto the podcasts. And while I actually believe I have a number of really interesting friends that would make for a lot of great conversations, I also recognize that the booking guests on this podcast would actually require scheduling guests, preparing interviews, preparing questions, conducting interviews with guests, editing, and a bunch of work. And I wasn't actually really sure if that was the level of commitment that I was looking to put into this. For now, this has actually been a platform where I've been using it for my own personal reflections. And so I'm just not really quite sure if this is where I want to go with it. But I am leaving open the idea. In the meantime, I do appreciate all the feedback. I do appreciate that folks are listening in. Hopefully, by moving to this format, I can make it a lot easier to access for people that don't read anymore. And if for any reason you have anyone else that you think might be interested in this podcast, I would definitely appreciate your forwarding along the links to either the YouTube or the Spotify or the Apple Podcasts. I would very much appreciate it. So I think that's it for this week 2 podcast. Again, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.